That brings us now to our third segment today, Flashpoints, our series on foreign policy challenges, most of them serious around the world. Juan Zarate is here, and we're starting with two of the perennial hotspots. Juan, this could be on everybody's list every week, North Korea and Iran. What's up?
What's interesting here, Bob, is that we had a summer of sanctions with respect to both Iran and North Korea that are biting. With respect to North Korea, you had the Treasury Department and the State Department enhancing the existing sanctions that exist. Interestingly, naming as part of the blacklist Office 39 from the North Korean regime. This is the office, the department of their bureaucracy that actually engages in illicit financial activity. And so quite significant that they went out and named this office, and the screws are tightening. With respect to Iran, these sanctions are really biting. And you had former President Rafsanjani from Iran saying just this week that they are facing sanctions like they've never seen before. You've seen the private sector pulling out. You've seen countries like Japan and South Korea, which had heretofore not wanted to impose sanctions, doing so. And you've seen the legislation and the efforts from the U.S. government really starting to bite, especially with petroleum exports. And
so financial pressures really can work.
It can absolutely work. The million-dollar question with both North Korea and Iran, though, Bob, is always, do they work to change the regime's calculus, ultimately, on the things that we care about? And in both cases, it's the nuclear question. And that is the big policy debate. Though these sanctions may be working as designed, they may be biting very hard. Are they going to ultimately slow the nuclear clock for both countries? And are they going to change those regimes' minds or bring them to the table to a point of compromise? The jury's still out on that, and I'm not too confident, especially with respect to both of these countries and their track record.
Yeah, no, well, they've had a very spotty track record, and sometimes we get their attention for a short period of time and then gone again.
That's right. We saw that with North Korea in 2005. We hit them very hard with financial sanctions. They had their nuclear test in 2006. They were brought back into the six-party talks. It dissolved again. And so it's a matter of gauging the pressure and trying to figure out how to use leverage well. It's hard.
A lot of military hardware could be going to Saudi Arabia. Big arms deal.
A record deal, actually. $60 billion deal over 5 to 10 years from the United States. Significant in its size, obviously. You have F-15s going to Saudi Arabia, helicopters, Apaches, Blackhawks, Little Birds. This is good news for Boeing, by the way, which makes a lot of these products, and in terms of jobs for Americans. But importantly, what it does is it sends a huge diplomatic signal. First, to the Saudis. It underscores the importance of the relationship. Secondly, to our other Sunni Arab allies in the region, the UAE, Egypt, Morocco, to say we're with you in a defense against threats to you, primarily Iran. And finally, it's a message to Iran. We are going to be in the region, we are going to help our friends, and we're going to supply them in a way that will give them advantages over you if, in fact, there is a conflict to come. And I think that's the most important issue here, because it's a signal in the context of the growing conflict with Iran, either potentially for a war, frankly, or setting up containment of Iran if, in fact, they achieve nuclear capabilities. And so this deal is not just a regular arms deal. It fits into this broader geopolitical question as to how to deal with Iran. The other thing I would say, Bob, is, and it's interesting, is you didn't hear much of an objection from the Israelis. And what this underscores is two things. One, the Israelis are in line to get some goodies on their own. They're in line for new F-35s. They're also acquiring some new anti-ballistic missile systems. They also, frankly, have the same interests as Saudi Arabia. They don't like Iran. Both countries.
It's the common enemy.
It's the common enemy,
yeah.
Exactly. And so the enemy is my friend, in
right.
a sense. They don't say it publicly. It's not talked about too much openly, but that's the reality, and that's why you didn't see too much squawking from Israeli politicians on this.
All right, the Turkey constitutional referendum. Where does that stand? What's going on there?
Well, what's interesting was Turkey just had this constitutional referendum, 26 amendments to their constitution from the early 1980s. This was important. It was a question of whether or not the referendum would go through, the amendments would go through. They did, resoundingly. They were all accepted. But the bigger question was this a referendum on the direction of Turkey? Was this a referendum on the current Prime Minister, Erdogan, who has proven very popular but somewhat controversial? Is this a referendum on his party, the AKP party? And underlying all this, Bob, is a question of what really is at play here. Because the referendum was styled as a move toward greater democracy, greater transparency, greater control of the military by civilian authorities, greater control of the judiciary. But those who don't like AKP or Erdogan say that really behind all of this is an Islamist agenda, that if you look at his history, what he's really trying to do is gain greater control for his party and actually draw it back from the secular roots of the founding of modern Turkey by Ataturk. And so it's interesting because you've got a question of, is this a deficit of secularism, or is this promotion of democracy? And is there something else at play underneath? And this has been ongoing as part of the national debate in Turkey for a couple of years now. And I think this referendum was part of that ongoing debate.
We talk about terrorism an awful lot, and oftentimes it's not good news there, but sometimes there is good news. And you have an example today.
A good example, ETA, the Basque terrorist group, designated a terrorist group not only by Spain and France, but also by the European Union and the United States, has called for a ceasefire. Now, this is not new. ETA has called for ceasefires in the past. In fact, the current Prime Minister, Zapatero, has been burned by potential negotiations with ETA. ETA, of course, bombed the Madrid airport in 2006 during some of these negotiations. So people are a little bit wary. But what's interesting about this moment for the call for the ceasefire is three things. First, ETA's under extreme pressure from not only Spanish authorities, but also French authorities. And so their leadership's been decimated. Two, they're losing more and more grassroots support within the Basque region. And so the political parties that have normally supported ETA are calling for an all-out disarmament and demilitarization of the movement. And third, to me, what's really interesting is that this falls into a larger debate about what happens to terrorist groups in the long term. We saw, for example, in Sri Lanka, the LTT, the Tamil Tigers, militarily defeated. You've seen IRA sort of negotiate its way out of being a terrorist group. There's still some violent elements there, but that's gone. ETA could go several different ways, but it's interesting to see this as part of the broader debate about what can be done about terrorist groups in the long term.
What's the end game? How do they unwind?
How do they unwind?
Because terror movements tend to build, and they also have to then unwind.
And they deflate, and they can get integrated, they can get destroyed, they can morph into something else, and I think that's a big debate, not only for ETA, but as we look at Al-Qaeda and what happens with the Sunni extremist movements in the future, I think this will be interesting to watch.
Well, it's good to leave it on a good note, and always interesting. Juan, thanks again.
Thank you, Bob.
All right.